Hi there, Book here. Alright, so on to the next video. So we covered, in the previous videos, we covered prophecy, particularly end-time prophecy regarding the Antichrist, which will be the next king of Israel, who hasn't had a king in 2,500 years, and the revelation of the whore of Babylon and the dragon on seven heads, the seven hills on which he sits, being the confirmation that Israel is the whore of Babylon, along with verses or words from the Old Testament and prophecies where God Himself describes these things to be true. Today, we're going to dive into a different topic. One I believe is extremely pressing and perfect for discussion today in our time. Marriage. So, marriage is a very simple thing. Let me tell you. Anyone you talk to who complains about marriage, they will have this to say. Marriage is a man-made institution. Why do we think about it? Why do we care to consider it? And I say to that, you're onto something. Good for you. Let me tell you, man did not create marriage, but marriage is a very specific institution defined by God. So if you don't like it, why are you trying to call whatever it is that you choose to do marriage? You can't redefine something that God has defined for Himself. That's like saying, well, I don't like that Jesus is Messiah, so I want Messiah to be cheese nips. You can't do that. I mean, it sounds ridiculous because that's exactly what you're doing. You're taking something that means something very specific in its own context and trying to take it out of its context to put it somewhere else. And that just doesn't work. That's what people are doing with marriage. I compartmentalized this very nicely. I wrote in a note, marriage is not about finding perfection. It's about commitment despite imperfection. So on those terms, people, if they want to commit to someone, they can. Now, I'm not advocating gay marriage. I'm not, um, what is it? What was the other word? If it's not avocation, it is denial. Against. We'll say against. I'm not against gay marriage. I say you have misdefined marriage. So we're going to talk about marriage in this topic, and it's very simple. It's very simple. It's very easy. It won't be a long video. Marriage, as defined by the Bible, is this: sex. Very simple. Like I said, sex is marriage. You find it in the New Testament. In Corinthians, Paul says to the Corinthians, because they had an issue with this, he says to them, would you marry a prostitute? Of course, the answer being no, implied. And he says, why are then you being joined unto a prostitute? And this is paraphrasing. You can read it for yourself. Just look up Paul, Corinthians, prostitute, and you'll get the verse. So basically he's saying, if you have sex with someone, you are married to that person. Marriage is not this ceremony. It's not the feast. It's not even the commitment. It's the union. Look it up in any dictionary. What is marriage? Look it up in the dictionary. It says marriage is the union between a man and a woman. Union. That's the key word here. You see, you cannot be married if you cannot unite. Physically unite. And as the Bible defines that, the only way for two humans to unite is with a penis and a vagina. And to unite those two is to be married. That's what marriage is. That physical action of intercourse unites your soul to this person. That's why it's adultery when you take someone else who is married, and you combine your soul with them, because their soul is already combined with someone else. You're pulling pieces of soul. You're destroying a soul. You're ripping that soul away from another so you can unite with it. And that's what adultery is. That's why That's why it's described as such in the Old Testament, where marriage is prevalent. Let me tell you some very simple scenarios too, our situations in the Old Testament. Adam and Eve. Adam was called the husband of Eve. Eve was called the wife of Adam. In the Old Testament, chapter 2, Genesis, Eve is described as a wife. Where was the ceremony? Let me tell you, that was the loneliest wedding ceremony ever. Only two people showed up. It was the bride and groom. So, marriage right there is defined by God as not being the ceremony. Because if it was about a ceremony, they didn't have one. Then they were in adultery. And that's what people in the church, remember, church is collective. People in the church, not everyone, have defined marriage as this ceremony. And if you have sex with someone outside of this ceremony, you're wrong. You're wrong and you're evil and you're going to hell. That's your fate. But that's not the case. Now, that doesn't give everyone a reason to just go and have sex with whoever they want. You got to be smart about this. Because when you have sex with someone, you are marrying that person. So, if you're just doing it because you like them, you're uniting yourself forever by soul with that person. If you've already done it, well, yeah, you're united to that person. It still doesn't change the fact that you've already done it. That doesn't mean it's impossible to never be married again. In fact, when it comes to widows, it says in the New Testament, if a widow decides that she wants to marry again, she can. She should, even. So that says something about marriage right there. It says that God is not so stuck in this idea that there's only one person that you have to be with for your entire life. If that person dies, the lover you had, they die, and you're lonely and you need companionship, you want another husband or want another wife, it is not against God to do this. In fact, he says to do it. Because when the time comes for all things to be new, to be changed, we humans will not be like the way we were. We will not be considered married, in the way that we look at it now. It's not. We're not going to need companionship. Our souls will be united with God, and that right there is the marriage talked about in Revelation. We're not going to have sex with God. It's a uniting of souls. We don't feel the uniting of souls. God can do it like that. That's what he's going to do when he brings us back to be judged and whatnot. That's how it's going to come. The result is we will feel connected to him the way a husband feels connected to a wife. I'm not talking emotionally. I'm talking spiritually. So that's where we get heaven, or where we get marriage from. So some of the scenarios, Adam and Eve being the most basic one, where God himself shows that marriage is not a ceremony. It's the action of intercourse that unites a person. And was it Jacob and Rachel, right? So in that story, he worked 7 years for the hand of Rachel in marriage, and he was tricked, and he ended up marrying the guy's older daughter, Leah, and he didn't want her. And as it turns out, he ended up marrying Rachel 7 years later. That doesn't change the fact that he treated Leah like crap, and she didn't deserve it, just because she went along with her father's twisted plot. But the fact was, he understood marriage, and marriage was being torn between these two women, because that's what he did. His soul was torn between these two women, to the point where they desired him, and he really only desired one, so he hated her, the other. So check it out. We also have what is this guy's name? Not Abraham. Abraham. His son Isaac and Rebecca. That was a fun one. So what happens is Isaac, because Abraham is a rich guy, he's legit in the area where he lives. He wanted to get a wife for his son when his mother passed away, because he was sad. He sent out his servants, said, "Go find this beautiful woman and bring one back for him. Bring a wife back for him." He finds one. He brings her back. She's out in the field, and Jacob sees her. Or not Jacob, Isaac sees her. They run straight to the mother's tent because that's where they did it back in the day where the marriage happened. They ran straight for the tent and got married. No ceremony necessary, if you know what I mean. And that's how they did it. They got married right there. Marriage is not the ceremony. Ceremony is great, but this is what we talk about eloping. People say, "I want to get eloped," and they think it's like some fu to the constitution of marriage, but really it isn't. What it is the reality of marriage, eloping. And when you do it out of selfishness, you're missing the point, and you're gonna hurt people. You're gonna hurt yourself. You're destroying yourself and somebody else. So the problem is understanding marriage, and this is where it gets very interesting because I've argued this before, and no one can really say anything about it because it's true. Like I said in the beginning of the video, marriage being an institution established by God as a man with a penis uniting with a woman with a vagina, right? So if that is marriage, it's the uniting of these two organs in holy matrimony through sex, intercourse, then it is impossible for anyone who doesn't do it this way to be married in the eyes of God. That is to say, we're not even gonna touch gay yet, gay lesbian marriages. Um, you have a man and a woman who decide to marry, and they're just not gonna have sex because they don't want to be unholy and defile themselves with women, as many people like to take out of context in those verses, and completely miss the other ones that say don't defraud each other so that you don't get tempted to go with someone else. So we have this man and woman who have decided to get married and they just won't have sex. The problem with that is they aren't married. They're not married because they don't understand marriage. Marriage is sex. They have not united their souls, and because they haven't united their souls, they aren't married. They may as well just be dating. Dating isn't something that happened in the Old Testament. It's not even something that happened in the New Testament. It's just this selfish way for people to try out marriages, try out people, and that's where that the saying I just came up with. It's not about finding perfection. It's about commitment despite imperfection. No one you find is going to be perfect, so why date, really? Um, I understand you have to like somebody, sure, and dating isn't bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm an advocate of dating. If you want specific things, but you don't have to prolong it. You don't have to like, oh, I've been dating this person for 5 years. I know this person since my childhood, and so that makes them somehow qualified to be a wife or a husband. All that does is make you proud, and it's not going to change anything. It's not going to make you a better person. It's not going to make anyone a better person. All it's going to do is just frustrate you for as long as you can take it, if you can even take it. So now we get onto the subject of homosexual marriages, to which I say, if marriage, being this constitution that many people are against because of the fact that it denies homosexuality to be considered marriage, you can't really argue that because it's a biblical concept. So if you are against this biblical concept, then what you need to do is not try to get married because you can't. It's a biblical concept. That's like saying, I want to be a saint. I'm going to sue the state because I can't be considered a saint. That's exactly what you're doing. I know there's, what is it? Domestic partnership is what the state currently calls homosexual unions, unions as they call it. But it's not a union as the Bible defines it, right? So, to that, there really shouldn't be any debate on whether or not gay people or lesbian people or the transgender community should be allowed to marry, because marriage is um, it's a Hebrew concept. I was going to say Christian. It is a Christian concept, but Christianity stems from Judaism, so it's a Hebrew concept. So you can't consider an argument against a belief that you do not hold. So if you are, say, you consider yourself to be Christian and you're homosexual, um, so obviously you know how the Bible feels about this. There's some arguments I've seen people saying the Bible isn't exactly clear on homosexuality. They don't say it's a sin, and it's ridiculous because the Bible calls it an abomination. It's an abomination, plain and simple. An abomination is much worse than regular sins. It's completely confusing the ordained function of something that is meant specifically for God, and homosexuality falls under that. So even if it doesn't say this is a sin, it says it's an abomination. It says that it's against God. So if you consider yourself Christian or Jewish and homosexual, you still can't argue with these things because you're holding on to a belief that says what you're doing is wrong. So what you need to do is either continue believing what you believe, which is that belief system, the Bible, and adjust to it because that's the belief you've chosen to hold, or abandon the belief because you don't believe what it says. You don't think this is wrong, so you can't. It's like me saying, as a Christian, I like the Bible and what Jesus was, what he stood for, and what God stands for, but I don't believe he exists. But I consider myself a Christian. I'm not a Christian. I'm an atheist, right? So I can't say I'm a Christian. I just don't, believe. I don't buy this whole God thing. That's exactly what's going on when it comes to homosexual marriage. If you're considering yourself to be a Christian or a Jew, and you're against the very core of what it is you claim to believe. The reality is you don't believe it. So you just need to accept that. Accept that you don't actually believe it and get rid of it. Don't try to lie to yourself and say, I believe this when you don't believe it because you're arguing against it. You can't force the hand of God. He's not going to change the words. It's already there. It's done. So, the reality of the fact is, homosexuals and transgendered cannot be married. It's not possible if you cannot create that union. And transgendered, obviously, it's a genetic mutation. As everything is a genetic mutation, but is a genetically sexual mutation. So the problem with that is that these things they happen in genes. Genes get messed up, whatever reason, whatever. Um, but you have to choose. Um, and these days, gender is a big thing. And there's a difference between gender and sexuality. Um, Sex is what you are, male, female, and gender is what you choose to consider yourself. I can be male and say, but I'm female gender. So I identify more with the female than I do male, and that's the confusion that comes in, and it's crazy because it's gotten to the point where children in middle schools are able to consider their own gender, and they can say, yeah, I'm a male, but I feel like I'm female, so I'm gonna go use the girls' bathroom, and that's okay in some places. But the fact is, you are what you are. Be comfortable in your own skin. Use it the way that you will, but don't try to manipulate the system. The system not being God, the system being humanity. You can't change it. You can't change genetics. I mean, you can, but it's another story. But you can't change it. So why try to mold the world around genetic mutations? It's ridiculous. Marriage itself is already predefined. You can't change it. You can't be married if you're homosexual. You cannot be married. I mean, sure, California now does it. They'll get a priest and say, hey, these two people will marry them holy matrimony. You're married. Problem is they don't understand it. So sure, you can, if you find a state where they do that, I don't care. The fact of the matter is that person doesn't understand marriage. And a lot of people don't understand marriage because it's quite simply, the point of this whole YouTube page, people don't read this. And the answers are right there. If it's defined, all you got to do is look into it and figure out what are the parameters that define this. And the parameters that define marriage is the ability to procreate, or not the ability to have intercourse between a male and a female. That uniting is what binds the spirit. That binding is marriage. You can't do that if you're male and male. You can't do that if you're female and female. As far as transgender, which is, transgender is a weird term. It's used to describe transsexuals, but transgender really is, it's not a thing. So as far as transsexuals go, I don't know how that is. Uh, you have like breasts and a penis. I don't know how that works. But these things are stuff that are caught when a child is born, and they can be modified when a child is born, and people choose not to do that. And it brings up a lot of confusion when this person grows up, because then they have these insecurities, they don't know what they are, and then they have to choose, and then you have society telling you it's okay, this is normal, but it's not, because we know it's not normal, because genetics don't work this way. There's so many complications when it comes to sexuality. Um, Particularly because I'm not going to make another video on this. I'll talk about it here. When it comes to sexuality, because I did study anthropology, um, there is a problem in genetics. If a person can be born gay, if there's a gene that allows someone to be homosexual, which I know scientists are looking into now, but they have not found it, um, the problem is fundamental. You see, you get someone who's born gay, assuming it's possible, someone is born gay, they're not going to reproduce. Why would they? They don't have any reason to reproduce, because they are not interested in the sexuality of someone who is not within their own sexuality. So the problem is that even if you could manage to force or use an argument like procreation to justify the existence of homosexuality, you have someone who became homosexual, wasn't interested in procreating with the opposite sex, and they did so anyway, and then you have to have that genetic mutation be transferred again. But the problem is, if it's a new genetic mutation, it's not going to get transferred, but it's not going to get transferred, what's the word? It's not going to happen for the next generation, because there's only one gene. You have to have two genes that come together and become dominant. But it's recessive. There's a word. So you'd have this procreation causing a recessive gene. Then you have to have that mutation randomly occur in another person that this homosexual will then procreate with. Two people who don't want to be together, who have that same homosexual gene to procreate, to create another. But then the problem is, you have to perpetuate that same system between a closed group of homosexuals, and then it has to be incest as well, because you have to continue putting that gene in there. Otherwise, you have to continue letting that gene randomly occur. And if that gene is continually randomly occurring, then it's either part of the nature or it's not. And the fact of the reality is, it's not. So you have to have incessant incest just to get homosexuality to be widespread enough that it can be considered a regular occurrence in the human condition. And it's not. That's the problem with this gay gene, as is colloquially called. It just, anthropologically, it cannot exist. Genetically, it can exist. Genetically, anthropologically, there is no way that it would have happened. Homosexuality is, it's not a gene. It's a choice. Just like gender. Gender is a choice. You choose to say, "Oh, I want to be with a man," because I feel like I'm a woman or whatever. And that's where you get homosexuality. But the fact of the matter is, the two of them will die without procreating, and that gene is gone. But as far as marriage goes, marriage, it's a union. Union is sex, and sex is what causes the souls to be united, bound. Not the ceremony. Not the ceremony. And I can't get that through enough. It really is not the ceremony. The ceremony is just a cultural festival. It's just a cultural concept. The ceremony has nothing to do with what's actually happening, which is the marriage. So as long as you understand that, we're good to go. And we'll talk about another hard topic next. So thanks again for listening, and I encourage you again to talk to people about this. Like the page, share, subscribe, talk about it amongst atheists, amongst agnostics, people who don't know what to believe, people who are still searching, people who know what they believe, and Christians. Because again, this whole page is about Christianity and what it entails and what I believe is truth. And these are the topics that you won't find Christians talking about. So I encourage you, having heard it, to talk to other Christians about it and say, hey, this person I heard said these things. What do you think about this? Again, if they don't want to talk about it, then find somebody else who will. Because the reality of the matter is, if you claim to be Christian, you need to have an answer. Bible even says that. Always be ready to give a defense for your belief. And 50% of Christians today aren't ready. So this isn't to attack them, it's to challenge them. And this is how you keep an open mind, is by really looking into these things and finding at the very least, getting all the information you can and really analyzing and straightening out what it is that could be truth. Truth is not relative. Truth is very subjective. I am here. I think, therefore I am. That's not a subjective statement. That's I exist. And that is truth. Somebody else can't say, oh, he doesn't exist to me. So in my world, it's relative. And truth is, you are not truth. You are not truth. We are not God. We are not existence itself. We are part of existence. And that's what truth is. Truth is existence. We're just small little parts of existence. We're parts of truth. And we just want to know the real truth. We want to know existence. And to do that, we can't be saying that stupid things like truth is relative. Let me tell you something. If truth is relative, then that statement is relative too. If truth is subjective and relative, then me saying that, I am defining that statement. I'm saying that the fact that truth is relative is true, and that's relative. It's a circle, and circles cause confusion. I was trying to draw it here and then pull it out. Circles. Circles create confusion. You never get to any point. And truth in a circle is not truth. It's a lie. It's a lie perpetuated. So we want truth. That's what we're doing here. So thanks again. And this is Book, signing off.